Snoop wasn't the type to start problems, but he also wasn't the type to walk away when one came looking for him. That's just how it was. You could be the chillest dude in the world, minding your business, just trying to get some tacos after a long night in the studio, and still, somebody always got something to prove. He had just pulled up to a little stand he'd been hitting for years, the kind of spot where the food was fire, the service was quick, and nobody acted weird. He was standing there, waiting on his order, scrolling through his phone, half listening to the cook chopping up carne asada on the grill, when he caught it, a voice, just a little too loud, just a little too close. "Look at this fool right here," someone muttered. Snoop didn't react at first. He had learned a long time ago, you don't feed that kind of energy. Let it breathe, let it pass. 9 times out of 10, it's just somebody talking, looking for a reaction they ain't gonna get. But then another voice jumped in. "Nah, for real, why he always acting like he run this city?" Snoop's thumb paused on his screen. He glanced up, real smooth, not turning his head all the way, just enough to catch them in his peripheral, a group of guys standing a few feet away, arms crossed, mean mugging him like they'd been waiting for this moment. And just like that, he knew. This wasn't about tacos anymore. Snoop had been in enough situations to know when something was about to go left. Most nights in LA, it was all love, people showing respect, throwing up peace signs, shouting his name from across the street. But every now and then, somebody had to make it weird. And tonight? It was one of those nights. He had just pulled up to one of his favorite taco stands, a little hole-in-the-wall joint between 2 buildings, the kind of spot that had been feeding the city for decades. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a red glow on the pavement, the smell of grilled meat thick in the air. He was just standing there, waiting on his order, scrolling through his phone, not bothering nobody. Then he heard it. "Look at this fool right here." The voice was low, just loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to be a full challenge. Yet, Snoop didn't react. Not right away. He had learned a long time ago that you don't feed that kind of energy. But then another voice followed. "Nah, for real, why he always acting like he run this city?" Snoop's thumb froze over his screen. He glanced up, real smooth, his head tilting just slightly, just enough to see them. A group of guys, 6, maybe 7, all standing just outside the glow of the taco stand's light, dressed in baggy jeans, hoodies, tattoos crawling up their arms and necks. Mexican street dudes, the kind that moved in packs, the kind that didn't talk just to talk. And the way they were looking at him? This wasn't about tacos anymore. Snoop had been in enough situations to know when a group of dudes wasn't just standing around for no reason, and even though he wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, he also wasn't the type to ignore what was right in front of him, because when you've been moving through the streets as long as he had, you learn to read body language just as well as you read a contract. And what he was seeing now wasn't casual, wasn't friendly, wasn't the kind of energy that led to a conversation. This was something else, something brewing just beneath the surface, something waiting for the right moment to spill over, and he knew, just by the way they were looking at him, that they were here for something more than tacos. The group was positioned just far enough away that they weren't immediately a problem, but close enough that Snoop could feel their presence, their eyes locked onto him like they were sizing him up, trying to decide how to approach. Whispering among themselves in low tones, their expressions unreadable but their intentions already loud enough, and even though he wasn't the type to flinch, wasn't the type to let paranoia get the best of him, he knew better than to act like he didn't notice. Because the moment you ignore something like this, the moment you pretend it's not happening, is the moment it moves from a thought to an action, and he wasn't about to let that happen without at least knowing what he was dealing with. Snoop didn't move, didn't shift, didn't adjust his stance in any way that would give away the fact that he was paying attention, but he was locked in now, taking in every detail. The way one of them kept his hands tucked into his hoodie like he was gripping something, the way another had his head slightly tilted like he was listening for some kind of signal, the way the youngest looking one, the one who was probably new to this kind of situation, kept glancing between Snoop and his crew, like he was waiting for permission to do something he wasn't sure he was ready for, and even though they hadn't said anything yet, hadn't made a move, the tension in the air was shifting fast, turning thick. turning into something that wasn't just background noise anymore, something that was creeping into the space between them like an unspoken challenge. Snoop had been through enough to know that situations like this could go one of two ways. Either they were just posturing, just trying to see if he'd react, just looking for a moment to feel bigger than they were, or they were actually ready to do something, actually waiting for an excuse to turn this into something it didn't need to be, and the only way to figure that out was to let the moment stretch, to let it breathe, to see if they were comfortable sitting in the silence or if they needed to fill it with action. And right now, the way they were standing, the way they were shifting just slightly, the way they were waiting, he could tell that they weren't here for nothing. One of them, the one with the shaved head and the tattoo running from his ear down to his jaw, finally broke the standstill, stepping forward just slightly, just enough to let Snoop know that whatever was about to happen, it was starting now, because the way he moved wasn't casual, wasn't relaxed, wasn't the way somebody moves when they're just trying to order food or pass by. It was deliberate, calculated, meant to send a message before a single word was spoken, and Snoop knew, the second the guy's weight shifted forward, that this wasn't just going to go away on its own. "You think you special, huh?" The guy's voice was smooth, too smooth, the kind of smooth that came when somebody was already convinced of something before they even asked, the kind of tone that wasn't looking for an answer, just an opening. And Snoop, still keeping his body language loose, still acting like none of this was a big deal, just let a small smirk pull at the corner of his lips before responding, letting his words roll out slow, casual, unbothered, because he knew that the more relaxed he stayed, the more it would frustrate them, the more it would throw them off, the more it would make them feel like they weren't in control of the moment. "Ain't that deep, homie," Snoop said, voice steady, eyes half-lidded behind his shades, the smirk still there but barely. "Just here for some tacos." Shaved Head didn't like that answer, didn't like the way Snoop wasn't reacting the way he wanted him to, didn't like the fact that no matter what, Snoop wasn't giving him anything to work with. And that was when things shifted again, when the space between them got just a little bit smaller, when another guy in the group, a younger one, probably the one trying to prove himself, took a step forward too. And Snoop could feel it now, feel the moment getting close to that tipping point, because the second one of them makes a move, the second one of them does something real, that's when everything starts. The young one didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't wait for permission, he just reached. It wasn't for a gun, wasn't for a knife, wasn't even for anything serious. It was for Snoop's chain, a stupid, desperate move that told Snoop everything he needed to know about the kid, about the fact that he wasn't really built for this, wasn't really thinking past the moment, just acting, just trying to impress the wrong people, just trying to grab something that didn't belong to him because he thought that was the move that would earn him respect. But before his fingers could even touch the chain, there was a crack. And then a yelp. And suddenly, the kid's wrist was bent at an angle that said he wasn't going to be reaching for anything else for a while. Snoop didn't even have to react, didn't even have to move, because his security had already handled it before he could blink. 1 second, the kid was reaching, and the next, he was caught, trapped, twisted into a position he didn't know how to get out of, and the big man holding his wrist, the one who had been standing just far enough away to seem uninvolved, but close enough to be everywhere at once, just leaned in slightly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Bad move." The rest of the group didn't wait, didn't argue, didn't try to jump in, they just started backing up, pulling away, melting into the dark the same way they had appeared, and even Shaved Head, the one who had started all of this, was stepping back, hands up, acting like this was just a misunderstanding, like nothing had actually happened, like they hadn't just tried to test the wrong one. Snoop sighed, shaking his head, turning back toward the taco stand like none of it even mattered. "People be making bad decisions when they hungry," he muttered, handing over his cash, taking his order, biting into his taco like this was just another night in LA. Because for him, it was. Snoop had been in the game too long to miss the signs when a situation started turning sideways, and even though he wasn't the type to flinch, wasn't the type to act like every little thing was a threat, he also wasn't the type to ignore the way the air had shifted around him. He had come here for tacos, for a simple meal after a long night, for something that felt normal in a world that was always moving too fast. But now, as he stood there, hands in his pockets, his order still sitting on the grill, he could feel it, that slow, creeping weight settling in the space around him, pressing down, turning casual into calculated, turning an ordinary night into something that was about to demand his full attention. The thing about moments like this is that they don't always start loud, don't always come with shouting or big movements or anything that would tip off the people around you, because the real ones, the ones who actually know how to move, they don't come in swinging, don't announce their presence with chaos. They let the moment stretch, let the silence say everything, let you feel them before they even make their first move. And that's exactly what was happening now. The taco stand was still working, the smell of carne asada still thick in the air, the sound of the grill still hissing as the cook kept his head down, pretending he wasn't noticing the way the night had changed, pretending he wasn't hearing the low murmurs from the group standing just outside the glow of the neon lights, pretending he wasn't already counting the exits in case he had to step back and let this play out without getting caught in it. Because this was a setup. Not the kind with cameras, not the kind with traps, not the kind with anything planned in advance, just a natural, instinctual kind of setup, the kind that happens when people decide, in real time, that they've got something to prove. Snoop didn't need to look at them to know what was happening, didn't need to turn his head to confirm what his body had already picked up on, didn't need to make eye contact to recognize the heat coming off them like pavement in the summer. This wasn't random. They weren't just there. They were there for him. A group of them, maybe 6, maybe more, all standing in that way that told him they weren't just waiting on food, weren't just passing through, weren't just kicking it on the block for no reason, they were watching. And they weren't watching with curiosity. They were watching with intent. You walk around like this city belongs to you. The voice cut through the noise like a blade, smooth, controlled, deliberate. Not loud. Not wild. Just direct. Snoop let the words sit there for a second, let them breathe, let them settle in the air between them like smoke curling from the tip of a joint. He could already tell what this was. Already knew how this conversation was going to go. Already knew they weren't here to talk. There's a way things move out here, a rhythm to how people test each other, a pattern that Snoop had seen play out 100 different ways in 100 different cities, and this was textbook. First, the approach. Not too close, not too far, just enough to make sure you feel them before they've even made a real move. Then, the words. Not a full threat, not an all-out challenge, just enough to see how you react, to see if you laugh it off, to see if you ignore it, to see if you come back at them, to see if they can get you to play the game. Because that's what this was. A game. And the way Snoop saw it, they had already lost. Snoop exhaled slow, steady, reaching into his pocket, not for a weapon, not for anything dramatic, just for his cash, for the money he had been planning to hand over for his food. Because the real power move wasn't showing them he was ready to fight, it was showing them that they weren't even worth breaking his rhythm for. That's what they wanted. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him to flinch. They wanted him to acknowledge them in a way that gave them control. But Snoop wasn't built like that. So he kept his body loose, kept his movements unbothered, kept his mind 2 steps ahead of whatever they thought was about to happen next, because the moment you give in to the tension, the moment you let them pull you into their world, that's when you let them win. One of them, the younger one, the one who was still learning, the one who had something to prove, misread the moment. He thought Snoop's lack of reaction meant something it didn't, thought the silence was hesitation, thought that if he pushed just a little harder, he'd be the one to crack the surface. And that's why he made the mistake that ended this before it even started. The younger one stepped forward, too close, breaking formation, reaching, not for a gun, not for a knife, not for anything that could actually back up the weight of what he was trying to do, just for Snoop's chain. For something that wasn't his, for something that he thought would turn this into a moment he could walk away bragging about. But before his fingers even brushed the diamonds, he wasn't moving anymore. Because Snoop's security? They had already been watching. Already been reading the play. Already been waiting for an excuse. And now, they had it. Snoop had always known that situations like this didn't just fizzle out on their own, that moments like these had a rhythm, a predictable pattern, a way of unfolding that always came down to one thing: who was really in control, and who just thought they were. The younger one had made his move, had stepped forward too fast, too confident, thinking that just because Snoop hadn't reacted the way he expected, it meant there was an opening, a weak spot, a place where he could slip through and walk away with something that didn't belong to him, something that would let him feel like he had won. But what he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Snoop had never lost control of this moment, not even for a second, not even when the air got thick, not even when the weight of all those eyes locked onto him, not even when the city itself seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. And the second that kid's fingers even thought about touching that chain, everything shifted. What the kid hadn't considered, what none of them had thought about, what too many people like them always seemed to forget, was that Snoop was never really alone. They had been so focused on him, so locked into the idea that they were testing him, that they didn't notice the two figures that had been standing just far enough away to be forgotten, just quiet enough to blend into the background, just still enough to seem like they weren't a factor. But the thing about security? The real kind, the kind that knows how to move, the kind that's trained to see a problem before it even becomes a problem, the kind that operates on instinct, on calculation, on knowing exactly when to act. They don't wait for permission. They don't wait for the problem to land. They end it before it even starts. One moment, the kid was reaching, his fingers inches away from something that was never going to be his confidence still intact, his heart still steady, his mind still convinced that he was about to make this night into something worth talking about. The next moment, he wasn't moving anymore. Because the first security guard, the big one, the one who had been standing off to the side like he wasn't even part of this, like he was just another body in the night, like he had nothing to do with any of it, had already grabbed his wrist before he even realized what was happening, had already twisted it just enough to make him stop, just enough to let him feel the pressure, just enough to make sure he knew that if he kept pushing, things were going to get a lot worse, a lot faster than he could handle. And the second security guard? He was already moving forward, already making sure the rest of the group understood exactly what was happening, already stepping into the space between them like a shadow they hadn't even noticed creeping up until it was too late. For half a second, nobody moved. Not the kid, whose face was frozen somewhere between pain and shock, not the rest of the group, who had suddenly gone from being the ones in control to the ones watching their whole plan collapse in real time. Not the taco stand guy, who had been flipping meat like nothing was happening but was now standing completely still, his eyes locked onto the scene like he was watching something that had played out 100 times before but still wasn't used to seeing. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Because this was the moment, the exact second where everything flipped, the moment where everyone involved had to decide what kind of night this was really going to be. The moment where the tension either exploded or disappeared, the moment where the next move was the only thing that mattered. Shaved head, the one who had been doing most of the talking, the one who had started this whole thing, the one who had let his ego drag them into a situation that had already turned against them, was the first to break. He stepped forward, his hands raised just slightly, not in surrender, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, and an understanding that there was no way out of this that left them looking like the ones who had won. "We good, homie," he said, his voice different now, less weight behind it, less challenge, more retreat, more trying to salvage something that was already lost. And Snoop? He still hadn't moved. Snoop just stood there, his posture loose, his expression unreadable, still completely unbothered, still acting like he wasn't even part of this, like this was just something happening in front of him that had nothing to do with him, like the moment had never been his to hold onto in the first place. And that was the real lesson. Because sometimes, the strongest move is not moving at all. One by one, the rest of the group started pulling away, backing up just slightly, their confidence unraveling, their energy shifting from aggressive to uncertain, from challengers to bystanders, from loud to quiet. Because they knew that they had already lost, that there was nothing left to prove, that the moment had already passed and left them behind, that whatever they thought this night was going to be, it wasn't that anymore. And they hated it. But they had no choice but to accept it. The security guard holding the kid's wrist finally let go, not with a push, not with anything extra, just a smooth release, a silent understanding that this wasn't necessary anymore, that the point had been made, that the lesson had been taught. The kid stumbled back, his face burning, his pride shattered, his hands still tingling from the pressure that had just been there, and for a split second, it looked like he wanted to say something, wanted to fix this, wanted to take it back or make it worse or do anything other than just stand there and accept the fact that he had made the wrong choice tonight. But he didn't. Because there was nothing left to say. Snoop exhaled slow, finally moving, finally reaching for his food, finally breaking the illusion that he had been completely still this entire time. And as he turned, as he took his first step away, as he walked past Shaved Head and the rest of the crew, he just muttered two words, barely loud enough to be heard, but loud enough to stick. Bad move. By the time he reached his car, by the time he slid into the seat, by the time the neon lights of the taco stand were just a blur in the rearview mirror, the whole thing already felt like something that had never even happened. Because for Snoop, it was just another night. For them, though, for the kid, for Shaved Head, for everyone in that group, they would remember. Because sometimes you don't need to win a fight to walk away knowing you lost. Snoop didn't look back as he walked toward his car, his steps slow, unbothered, as if nothing had happened, as if the entire moment had already faded into the night like smoke, as if the group of Mexican street dudes who had tried to test him were nothing more than background noise, nothing more than a minor distraction, nothing more than a story that wasn't even worth telling. The city still moved around him, the streetlights still hummed, the sound of traffic in the distance still rolled by like nothing had changed, but for them, for the ones who had thought they could control the night, everything had changed. They were still standing there, still frozen in the moment, still adjusting to the fact that it hadn't gone how they thought it would, still feeling the weight of what had just happened, still processing the fact that they had miscalculated, that they had stepped into something they were never really ready for. And Snoop? He was already gone. Back at the taco stand, the air was still thick with the weight of what had just happened, but nobody was talking about it, nobody was acknowledging it, nobody was saying a word because there was nothing to say, because everything that needed to be said had already been communicated without a single extra move, without a single unnecessary word, without a single moment of escalation that would have changed the outcome. The cook just kept working, flipping tortillas, acting like the night had never skipped a beat, but Snoop knew he had seen it all, knew that he had watched every second of it unfold, knew that he was standing there with the quiet understanding of a man who had seen too many nights like this, too many young guys making bad choices, too many moments where ego led people into situations they weren't built for. Snoop pulled open his car door, slid inside, took a deep breath, let it all settle. And then he laughed. Because at the end of the day, it was nothing new. The drive away from the taco stand was smooth, the city rolling past his window like a movie he had seen 1,000 times, neon signs flashing, people moving, the rhythm of the streets never stopping, never hesitating, never changing just because one group of dudes had learned a lesson the hard way. Snoop wasn't mad, wasn't stressed, wasn't even thinking about it anymore, because this was just part of the game, just part of moving the way he moved. Just part of being who he was in a world that always had someone waiting for an opportunity to test him. But what they didn't understand, what people like that never seemed to understand, was that he had already been tested. A long time ago. And he had already passed. Somewhere in the city, those dudes were still processing it, still replaying the moment, still trying to make sense of why it had gone wrong, still trying to act like it wasn't a loss when they all knew deep down it was. But Snoop? He wasn't thinking about them. He wasn't thinking about what could have happened, what might have happened, what almost happened. He was thinking about his tacos. Because at the end of the day, that's all he ever came for.